Bom, boa tarde a todos. É um prazer imenso, uma satisfação estar aqui neste colóquio, ter a participação do professor Michael Wood, que é professor na Universidade de Princeton, nos Estados Unidos. O professor Michael Wood, antes de lecionar em Princeton, onde ele começou a dar aulas em 95, meio dos anos 90, ele teve a sua formação acadêmica na Inglaterra, seu país de origem, em Cambridge, em literatura. Ele lecionou também na Universidade de Colômbia e como professor visitante em várias outras universidades. O professor Michael Wood tem uma obra extensíssima, bastante variada, que inclui livros sobre Stendhal, Nabokov, Kafka, Yeats, um livro sobre os oráculos na literatura e no cinema, e uma produção também muito grande sobre cinema, que ele acompanha por meio de uma coluna mensal publicada na London Review of Books, chamada At the Movies, uma militância também no cinema. No Brasil, além do citado Estilo Tardio, que foi um curso que o Eduardo Said preparou para ser dado em Colômbia, na Universidade de Colômbia, enquanto já estava doente. Ele deixou essas anotações, esses textos em estados variados de finalização, e o Michael Wood, que foi vizinho dele em Nova York, recolheu esse material e organizou o volume que saiu há alguns anos pela Companhia das Letras, que foi a citação que o Francisco Alvim fez desse livro chamado Estilo Tardio, que tem a ver com essa ideia do livro de velhos, que você observou nesse último beijo na nuca do Dalton Trevisan. Como eu disse ontem na abertura, o Michael Wood escreveu sobre Dalton Trevisan em 1973, um texto publicado na The New York Review of Books, intitulado Latins in Manhattan, latinos ou latino-americanos em Manhattan, vários livros que ele resenhou. Então tinha livros, obras do Miguel Astúrias, Carlos Fuentes, Bioy Casares, Julio Cortázar e Machado de Assis, o Memorial de Aires, que estava sendo lançado ali naquele momento, no início dos anos 70, em tradução para o inglês. E nesse texto, um texto longo, naquela época os jornais ainda comportavam textos mais longos, ele fazia observações que me parecem muito certeiras sobre The Vampire of Curitiba and Other Stories, que é o título dessa coletânea de contos do Dalton Trevisan, que saiu nos Estados Unidos. Se não me engano, é a única coletânea de contos do Dalton traduzida até agora, traduzidas para o inglês e publicadas nos Estados Unidos. Essa tradução foi feita nada mais, nada menos do que pelo Gregory Rabassa, que foi o tradutor, naquela altura era super badalado como tradutor dos 100 Anos de Solidão, que tinha saído em 70 nos Estados Unidos, e que tanto Gregory Rabassa como, obviamente, o lançamento dos 100 Anos de Solidão nos Estados Unidos era o epicentro, digamos assim, do chamado famoso boom latino-americano nos Estados Unidos. E o Dalton, é interessante pensar que o Dalton foi publicado, nesse conjunto, e a tradução do Dalton ficou perdida ali no começo dos anos 70, porque ele não foi retraduzido, enquanto todos esses outros autores, de alguma maneira, encontraram lugar, digamos assim, no mercado editorial do gosto norte-americano. Miguel Astúrias, Bioy Casares, Julio Cortázar, e o próprio Machado de Assis, de alguma maneira, enfim, foi muito traduzido depois disso nos Estados Unidos. O Rabassa depois traduziria também Clarice Lispector, Machado de Assis, Jorge Amado e Osman Lins. As observações que o Michael Wood fez a respeito do Dalton Trevisan em 73, elas eram com certeza que me pareciam. Eu tive a impressão que ele devia ter se mantido como uma espécie de leitor em surdina do Dalton Trevisan nesses anos todos. Quando pensamos no colóquio, o Fernando e eu escrevi para o Michael Wood, mencionando o texto de 73 e perguntando se ele continuava interessado na obra do Dalton Trevisan e se gostaria de vir participar desse colóquio. Eu confesso que eu fiquei surpreso com o aceite, com a facilidade com que tudo transcorreu até o momento em que ele chegou ao Brasil. 5, 6 e-mails, e ele fez um e-mail e as coisas se resolveram. Ele tinha um texto, que é o texto que ele vai apresentar aqui, que está traduzido. Eu peço que vocês, desculpa, a tradução lá foi feita um pouco rapidamente, então devem ter sobrado gralhas, que vocês perdoem isso, enfim. Mas que entre a fala dele e a tradução, que vocês aproveitem o que o Michael tenta nos dizer, e que eu tenho certeza que é a bibliografia que está se constituindo neste momento a respeito da obra do Dalton Trevisan. Então, queria passar a palavra para você, agradecer mais uma vez a presença e a disposição.
Thank you, Elio, and my thanks to Fernando, Eliane, and the organizers of the conference, and also to everyone who's here listening, and also to the speakers of today and yesterday. It's a real pleasure for me it was not a question for me of maintaining an interest of Dalton Trevisan over 40 years in a very systematic way. It was rather a rather unsystematic, wavering attention suddenly brought to concentration by an email from Ilya, in which I read a whole lot very recently. So that it is a great pleasure to return to this writer, in a way, to discover him again. And I'm very grateful to you all for allowing this to happen. You will recognize instantly in this talk many echoes from yesterday and from today, many connections, and I can only say I'm very grateful for them, and I wish they were intentional. They are not intentional, so I can't take any credit for them. I can accept good fortune, but I don't get any credit for these connections. And one last thing about the relation of a person from a distance to local material. For a long time, the phrase, this is not in this text, for a long time the phrase close reading was a technical phrase, lectura cercana in Spanish, to read very closely every word and to read every word for several meanings. Quite recently, a man called Franco Moretti, an Italian scholar in America, has invented the idea of distant reading, lectura lejana. This consists of this is the opposite of close reading. You don't, to do lectura lejana, you don't have to open a text. You just have to know things about it. So you have to know, in order to do a lectura lejana of an English author, you have to know where the novels are set. Are they near London or are they far from London? Are the French novels in the provinces or the capital, where you don't need to read any words of the book. Now, what I would like is your assistance in inventing a new category, which would be lectura cercana de una persona distante. My case. That is, I only know how to do close reading, but I am fully aware of the distance, psychological, cultural, linguistic, literary, the distance at which this close reading is performed. But the sort of close reading is what it is, but close reading at a distance. Okay. With that, I will start on this text. The quotation is from Debussy, music is the silence between the notes. Now to say that music is the silence between the notes, is of course to say that musical silence has to be made. That is, silence is no longer the absence of noise. Silence in this case, the silence of music, is the particular silence that particular noises create. And even explained in this rather pedestrian way, the notion is still radical, I think, and would be thought radical for many musicians who would tell us simply, this is too complicated. Music is not silence of any kind. Music is sound. Now we may think, I want to suggest, this is close enough, we may think of literature in something of the same way. There are writers for whom literature is the silence that arises among the words, that escapes from the words. In this case, literature would be, like Debussy's music, it would be the particular set of particular silences that the particular combinations of words create. Now again, this is not everybody's taste. There are writers for whom words are everything, silence is nothing. There are writers for whom the meanings of a text are in the words of the text, not outside or not beyond them. These distinctions between writers who care about silence and writers who don't care about silence do not necessarily reflect judgments of value. I have a suspicion myself that the greatest writers, like the greatest composers, are always interested in silence. But my suspicion may of course be, I have a suspicion, as I say there, that my suspicion itself is only prejudice, not a firm judgment. However, if we wish to study silence in literature, to listen to the silence between and beyond the words, we cannot do better than read Dalton Trevisan. We might think that the silence in his case has to do with brevity. The shorter your stories, we might say, the longer the silence around them. This is true, but a little mechanical. Silence in literature, as in music, is not quantity. It's not a matter of how much. Silence is selective. It is created anew on every writing occasion. I do want to talk about the shortness of Trevisan's work, and I want to follow Fernando's idea about the works getting shorter and shorter. I want to concentrate on the very short works, but that is only because his longer works are also short, in a non-quantitative sense. Shortness, this is rather elementary but necessary. Shortness only has meaning in relation to length, and shortness as a literary value only has meaning in relation to the length the text does not have. It's only short because it's only short in a certain way because it's not long in a certain way. And in this sense, we might say that Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu, however long it is a short book, in a way that the novels of Balzac or Zola, or even Tolstoy perhaps, are not short. Creative shortness then is defined not by what it gives us, but by the richness of the silence it leaves us with. And the last piece of introduction, my title, Crimes of Silence, mentions crimes as well as sounds. The crimes in question here, of course, are the stories themselves, rather than the crimes that occur rather frequently in these stories. But a crime of silence, I want to say, is a bit like a crime of passion. With a crime, as you know, one of Trevisan's titles, a crime of passion is, the genitive is interesting. A crime of passion is caused by passion. Passion is the reason for a crime of passion. But also a crime of passion belongs to passion. It is passion's possession or its property. And similarly, a crime of silence, if not exactly belonging to silence, has silence as its goal and its model. The crime of silence in literature is committed for the sake of silence, and silence becomes the owner of this text, the beneficiary of its gift. This is how, I'm taking my example here, Trevisan, this is how he defines the perfect crime in a story called The Perfect Crime. There's a body, there's a murderer, and no one can call the police. It's about a woman killing her husband by just being married to him. Now, there are, we've heard many of them, other ways of looking at Trevisan's work. But for today, I want to take this evocation of crime as a model for his work. There's a body, there's a murderer, and no one can call the police. The body and the murderer are the texts, the uncalled police are the silence, and the conjunction of body, murder, and absent police is the music. I should insist, perhaps just for legal reasons, that the works are not crimes in any other sense, in any other legal sense, but they do. I like the word crime because it catches something of the violence and horror that lurks so constantly in the discretion and humour and elegance of these stories. Augusto spoke yesterday of delicacy and cruelty going together. And this strikes me as absolutely exact about what is that unusual mixture. The more delicate, the more cruel. The more cruel, the more delicate. Here's an introductory exercise in thinking about shortness. This relates to Arnaldo's exercise yesterday of rewriting the text, and to a certain extent, it's a different form of rewriting, but I thought of it. And this is so essentially what I've done here is to rewrite a short story, taking everything out except the names of places. So here's the story. The story is called My Dear Husband, and I've taken out pretty much everything except the names of places mentioned. Pardon my pronunciations, but Joao was married to Maria and they lived in Juveri. They moved from Juveri to Bocaiao. He built a pretty little bungalow in Prado Velho. Joao moved from Prado Velho to Capanema. They withdrew from Capanema to the heights of Mercedes. He moved from Mercedes to Agua Verde. Before Joao decided to move from Agua Verde to Vigorillo, Joao moved to Bacacheri, from there to Batel, and at the moment he's very happy in a little wooden house in Cristo Rey. Okay. So we've recognized the story. The story is the terrible tale of the eternally unfaithful Maria and the eternally patient Joao. Every time her infidelities cause a crisis in the marriage, they move house and they move neighborhood. Nothing else changes except their lodgings. Everything remains the same. They move house. Neither her taste in men changes, nor her appetite for men, nor his feeling that there is no one like Maria. I quote this because I think it's quite amusing to cut down the story to its locations, but I quote it really for the sake of its last paragraph, which begins, "The neighborhoods of Curitiba are endless." Se encontros aos barrios de Curitiba. Now, this is surely one of the most musical of simple sentences. The neighborhoods of Curitiba are endless. The neighborhoods are not literally endless. No city has endless neighborhoods. You get the end, and somehow, however far you go, you leave the city. However many neighborhoods there are, they're not endless. They're not uncountable. But the silence of this sentence seems to be marvelous because of everything it does not say about what is endless. The city, Curitiba, becomes the site of changes, first of all, of changes that change nothing, but are still changes of house, of a consistency that relocates itself regularly, but remains the same. And of course, if the neighborhoods of Curitiba are metaphorically endless rather than literally endless, then this story itself is also endless and is likely to repeat itself in as yet unnamed neighborhoods of Curitiba, and possibly in Sao Paulo, possibly in other cities, and possibly in any city in the world, right? Cities that we haven't even thought of yet. In other words, this is something I'm interested in theoretically, and Roberto will remember my talking about this. This is a favorite topic of mine. Curitiba is and remains a real city, but it's also a place where Curitiba stories happen. That is, Curitiba is Curitiba, but a place where Curitiba stories happen is also Curitiba. Okay, these stories don't happen everywhere, but they could happen anywhere. This is my theoretical contribution to a certain idea of fiction, but it's not my invention. The invention is that of it's an old invention. The idea belongs to Henry Fielding, the novelist, and he elaborated this theory in the middle of the 18th century. He made what I think is, I often think, so I don't have a lot of company in this idea, but I often think the best literary theory is made in the form of jokes. Not many theorists share this view, but this is a wonderful piece of literary theory in the form of a joke. And it's about how places can be local, events can be local, but also different. Here's what he says. Fielding's distinguishing between the people he calls historians, who we would also call historians, and people he calls biographers, whom we would call novelists. Historians, he said, get their facts right in the sense of telling us correctly the times and places of what has happened. They know the dates and the country. If it happened in France on a certain date, they always know this. But they get all the moral and human facts wrong. So they write about times and places They're wrong about what Fielding calls the actions and characters of men. So they don't know, they can't tell us whether X is a good guy or a bad guy. They can't tell us whether they're rogues or honest person. They can only tell us the dates and the places. With biographers, i.e. novelists, Fielding says the example is the opposite. They can't get the dates right, but they're always right about the people. Here's a longish quotation, which I read slowly because it's in rather old-fashioned English, but it is very funny. Fielding says that we biographers / novelists of us, the facts we deliver may be relied on, though we often mistake the age and country wherein they happen. The novelists are right about the facts, but they get the places wrong. Then he gives several examples. For though it may be worth the examination of critics, whether the shepherd Chrysostom is the figure, as you know, in Quixote, who, as Cervantes informs us, died for love of the fair Marcella who hated him, was ever in Spain, will anyone doubt that such a silly fellow hath really existed? He may not have existed in Spain, but he certainly existed. So Cervantes might have made a mistake in putting him in Spain, but he didn't make a mistake in creating him. And then this wonderful example now. The most known instance of this kind, this Fielding says, is in the True History of Gil Blas, the novel, the French novel by Lesage, where the inimitable biographer had made a notorious blunder, a terrible mistake in the country of Dr. Sangrado. That he's made this terrible mistake of saying that Dr. Sangrado works in Spain. This is a doctor who used his patients as a vintner, a winemaker, doth his wine vessels by letting out their blood and filling them up with water. Doth not everyone who is the least versed in physical history, by which Fielding means medicine, does not everyone who knows anything about doctors know that Spain was not the country in which this doctor lived? So, see, the joke here, just to spell it out rather crudely, the situation is here. I'm not sure that Lesage is telling the truth about Spain, but I know that doctor. He just charged me huge fees last week. We recognise the doctor even if the place is wrong. The reason I think this is such a good joke and so lightly done is that he never stops calling it a mistake. So he still insists that the country is wrong, but the facts are right. In other words, what he's calling mistake here is actually fiction. The creation of a character who comes alive whenever and wherever we recognize him or her. I like this because, in a sense, the usual way we have of connecting the local to something else is through the universal. But the universal, in a way, the universal is a bit like nowhere, where a relocation to a different place is somewhere else. And I'm very interested, this requires a lot of development, I'm interested in the idea of two somewheres rather than the nowhere that might be the universal. And as I say, we recognize that doctor. My own favourite example is that, as I say in the text, for some years in England, I lived next door to Mrs. Bennet from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. She was so entirely Mrs. Bennet that I wonder how anybody could ever have thought that she was a character in Jane Austen. She was my neighbour. She couldn't be in a book written 100 years old. So just to spell this out in a little more crudely, and less amusing, literature, like any piece of language, can refer to the world in many ways, but in two ways above all. It can name specific times and places, and those times and places are what they are in actual history. That's one mode of reference. Curitiba is Curitiba, Spain is Spain, and Balzac's Paris is everyone's Paris. The reader of such references, acts of reference, either knows or pretends to know where he or she is. Second way of referring, this is also true of ordinary language as well as literature. It can name specific times and places that migrate in the imagination into other times and places. These places remain specific, but their points of reference, or the texts remain specific, the words remain specific, the names, but their points of reference are multiple, rather like pronouns rather than proper names. So if I name a city, or if I say Michael, actually even proper nouns are not absolutely specific, because I might say Michael and you might say which Michael. If you say which Michael, then the pronoun is the proper noun is working like a pronoun. Because if I say I, you know who's speaking. If I say I and you're listening, you know who I is. So the way I'm suggesting that literature, like any other piece of language, can work like a pronoun. It doesn't always, it can, but it does. So in this model, as distinct from the one I just mentioned, Curitiba is Curitiba, Spain is Spain, and Kafka's Prague is, I list some examples, it's an interrogation room under the Third Reich. It's a small town in occupied France. It's a suburb in Buenos Aires, and it's a broken village in Syria and in many other places. The Kafka text is designed for travel in a way that I'm suggesting Balzac's or Tolstoy's texts are not designed for travel, in the same way that the Kafka's text is full of silence, and these other texts are not quite so full of silence. And another, just an instance of language, in a poem written in 1919, W.B. Yeats wrote these famous words: "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." He wrote this in 1919. He was referring to the British in Ireland and the Irish in Ireland also during the Civil War. Within several years, everyone thought this poem referred to the rise of fascism. It was so accurate. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passion intensity. What better description of appeasement of the 1930s and the years of Munich than that? Not long ago, Paul Krugman in the New York Times quoted it to refer to the conditions today. He quoted it without even mentioning Yeats. And so the assumption is that everyone knows what this means and everyone knows who this can be referred to. So this is my point then. My point then is we have to lose the idea of correctness here. The original reference is not the correct one, it's just the original. The others are also correct. They can also be not correct, and they can be loosely used and stupidly used, and you can just generalize and lose it. So I just insist, I don't wish to lose sight of the entanglements of all text and all speech in material history. I'm not trying to free texts from material history. I'm trying to multiply their material histories to give them other lives as well as their original life. Now, Trevisan's brevity, the wonderful silence of Trevisan's work, these take many forms. I'm going to concentrate on two for the sake of focus. And actually, just to anticipate, the two things are going to turn into one anyway. The mini-story and the aphorism. Both of these forms have interesting international histories, and it is intriguing to see how Brazilian they become in Trevisan's hands and how stylishly they travel once they've been set to travel. This is partly what I'm saying by exercising close reading by a distant person. Like many other modern literary forms, I think now, the mini-story was probably invented by Flaubert. The clearest example I know occurs early in his novel, The Éducation Sentimentale. A whole crowd of members of the petite bourgeoisie of Paris and its environment are on a steamer going down the Seine. They're having a good time. We can imagine their songs, their laughter, their jokes, their drunkenness, their costumes, their faces, their ages, their vanity, or their carelessness. We can imagine this because we read a lot of novels that describe such things in detail, and we might have seen these things in real life as well. And this indeed is what we expect from a novel that contains such a scene. People on a boat, they're going to be described, their clothes, their costumes, and everything else. The work is done for us as it would be if this was a movie. But you couldn't shoot this scene in the movie without deciding on costumes, characters, actors, location, and a whole series of things. This is what Flaubert does. Flaubert writes 3 sentences. Beaucoup chanté, on était gai, il se versait des petits verres. That's it. That's the whole description. Right? Many sang, people were in a good mood, and small glasses were poured. Now, we can, most readers do, hear a critical note, or a note of contempt in this concision here, contempt for the people in question. And it is true, there is a kind of rather desolate absence of people here. These are busy people, but the prose has no people. It just has many, beaucoup, on, one, and a passive verb form. totally the language is absent from the occasion in a way. There may of course be no contempt for the people at all, but just a joke about novels. This is like the novel as a mini story. The novel's turned into a mini story, 3 sentences. I do find these wonderfully funny, but they may not be funny if you're not in the mood. They may just feel hostile. But the interesting thing is just to keep reading this novel, you have to do the work these sentences are not doing. You have to fill in the people in the way I just did. You become the novelist in a very literal sense because you have to supply the people the prose will not give to you. The most famous mini story in the same novel, in Education Sentimentale, appears quite near the end. It's a famous line. Nabokov, when Nabokov's Humbert in Lolita keeps using this phrase, he does it all the time for the later part of his travels across America with Lolita, and he says, "Oh, this is royal fun." Says, using this sort of language. But the language is this: the hero, he has various crises, his life falls apart, and he decides to travel. This is how the travel is described. Il voyagea. This is how it describes his return is described. Il revint. He traveled, he came back. In between, there was a small, rather bleak paragraph. Il connut la mélancolie des paquebots, les froids réveils sur la tente, l'étourdissement des paysages et des ruines, l'amertume des sympathies interrompues. So we get a little detail here. But this, I think, is also, I add this because it's a great feature of the mini story. Sometimes the mini story leaves out details altogether, as we did this afternoon. Sometimes it gives you just enough detail for you to know how much detail is missing. You understand what's missing by what is given to you. Now, I said that Flaubert invented the mini story, but I know you will recognize this is not conventional literary history. Flaubert didn't literally, or as far as historians are concerned, invent anything of the kind. I'm following here the method you will recognize, which is that of Borges in Kafka and his precursors, where the precursors don't influence Borges. Borges allows us to choose who his precursors are. So in fact, I've loved those sentences of Flaubert for a long time, but I would not have thought of them as calling them a mini story until I read Trevisan again. So actually, Trevisan is the inventor of the mini story, and Flaubert is now his precursor. But Flaubert wouldn't have been his precursor if he'd not invented the mini story. One more example of another mini story, and then I'll arrive at Trevisan. This is a more overt, explicit mini story. I'm sure Trevisan knows it. It was written by the Guatemalan writer Augusto Monterroso. It's celebrated by Italo Calvino in the lectures that he did not live to give at Harvard in 1985, published at Lezioni Americane. Calvino says he would like to edit a collection of tales consisting of one sentence only, but he's not found anything quite as good as Monterroso's. Monterroso's full, complete story is Cuando despertó, el dinosaurio todavía estaba ahí. That's it. This is not like Flaubert, it's not even in the middle of a novel, it's simply a complete text. And what I find here, this leads me very directly to Trevisan. Calvino, in this chapter, Calvino is about speed and concision. And for Calvino, speed is a matter of getting to places quickly and lightly. I think he's right about this, but this is not my reading of Trevisan. Trevisan's short. Trevisan's sentences and stories are short, but they're not quick. They're not speedy because they're actually very slow. So that, and they're not, I think, in the end, for me, Trevisan's mini stories are not concise. They're immense. It's just that we have to do the filling out of what is in them. Their brevity then is not a goal. The brevity is what makes them so large. The brevity is the sound that organizes the silence. So that neither Monterroso's sentence about the dinosaur nor Flaubert's sentences, if we think of them as mini stories, they do not seek to compress a proposition. They seek to open the infinite spaces of what is not said. And then we start thinking. Cuando despertó, el dinosaurio todavía estaba ahí. We don't know whether the person is male, female, or even human. Cuando despertó. Where did the dinosaur come from? What does it mean still, todavía? Where should it have left? And if it should have left, where should it have gone? How did the person go to sleep when there was a dinosaur there? I mean, is the story here, oh, there's a dinosaur, I think I'll take a nap. Now, it's true that the next sentence in such a novel would be, Quando espector, in any case, if it is a human being and not some other creature, what is it doing in the world of dinosaurs? Asleep or not asleep? Now, here's an instance from Trevisan himself that in its way is, I like to think of it as rich as Anna Karenina. I'm thinking of the phrase about all happy families are alike. The short, this is 3 short sentences also. Was I happy in my marriage? The Portuguese begins is a duplication of the question with an if. Sei eu fui feliz no casamento. Was I happy in my marriage? Only in the first 3 days. After that, it was the hell that has lasted until today. Inferno que dura hoje. Now, so much is happening in the silence of the sentence here, it seems to me. If we allow our minds to linger over this answer to a question, 3 days is not very long, but 3 days is not very long, but on the other hand, it could feel long. How long is it? What sort of perspective would make 3 days seem long or short? When is today? How long back do we have to go there? How far away are those 3 happy years? How long has this marriage been hell? Are hell and happiness really mutually exclusive? Were there no days of happiness in the years that followed after? Was it all uniquely and exclusively hell? Was there no hell in the first 3 days? And so I was taken, as I read it, I've taken with Bertha's wonderful remark in Bertha's book, where she says that it's a much crisper view than mine, that in Trevisan's work, Bertha says, the other, the new or different, is strangely invested with the attributes of the same. The other, the new or different, is strangely invested with the attributes of the same. At this point, hell and happiness begin to waver. But anyway, we have to go on with this. If we either read the story quickly, think we've got it, or we pause. If we pause, we're lost. Days will go by while we write the novel that is not written there. We've spoken about the happy years or the happy days or the not happy days. But what about the dialogue between the two? What about their daily actions? What about his job? What about her infidelities if she has them? What about the children? What about the children they don't have? What about their infidelities? What about the cruelties? What about the whole novel that the mini story is not? Okay. There are so many implications to pursue in this instance. I'm coming to some other instances, but I want to suggest one which is about human behaviour and not just in novels, because I find this is an insidious and troubling question about fiction. We read a mini story like this, and we may or may not, in our heads, write the novel that Trevisan bequeaths to us. We may or may not have the energy or the time or the inclination to do it. But we do very often, or whether we know it or not, write novels in our heads whenever we imagine something or try or think we're understanding something. So much of what, this is my suggestion, much of what we think of as understanding the world or other people, paying attention to the world or other people, is actually a matter of writing our own novel about those other people and those events. All of us, this is easier to recognize when someone else does it to you or to us than when we do it to other people. That is, I'm sure all of us have been caught up at some point in someone else's novel. We're in this other novel. It's got nothing to do with us. It's not true, but we can't escape. We can't escape the behaviour they attribute to us because they've written a novel about us, and we're going to behave like the characters in our novel. My point is that we also do the same thing. This is an aspect. This is a real-world aspect of the art of fiction, so that when we pause over one of Trevisan's mini stories, we're not only accepting an invitation to become his co-writers, to become the prolific authors of the non-novel he has so frugally set before us, we are continuing to practice this habit that we're already practicing probably more than we know. The power of imagining what is not there is the source, the engine of both wonderful artistic invention and of a great deal of human prejudice. Right? So the novels we imagine can enable us to understand people in a very rich and deep way. It's morally neutral. Fiction also allows us to believe terrible things about other people and nations and cultures, to invent novels about them. Okay, I want to talk now about the two genres that are going to they're going to melt into one in a minute, but I'll keep them apart just for a second so I can say something about both of them. First an aphorism, and then the mini story. An aphorism seems to say something complete and final, seems to offer the last word. But the stylization and simplification of the aphorism are usually so extreme that it reminds us of everything left out, even as it pretends that it's leaving nothing out. What is left out, though, with the aphorism is not detail or narrative, as with the mini-story, but all rival concepts and conditions, everything that might make the aphorism seem less true and less final than it seems at present. So the ideal aphorism, I want to suggest, actually has a gap in it, has a kind of leak, which is very tidiness enhances. The more tidy it is, the more it's likely to leak. So the aphorism then, in spite of appearances, is not telling us what to do, it is asking us to start thinking about what to do. It's not complete, and our business with it is not finished. The first one then, if fish could scream, fish could cry out, who would dare go fishing? Well, the first answer is, a lot of people. Everybody, every sadist in the world, everyone likes pain of other people, everyone is unmoved by creatures, everyone's not interested in animals or fishes. So the short answer to this question is most fishermen. Right? The beauty of the aphorism, of course, this aphorism appears in the story Creatures of the Night, and it also appears in the volume 234, Louis Fisquato. The interest of the aphorism is its secret selection of its friends. The aphorism speaks to the people who are already agreeing with it. Right? If fish could scream, who would dare go fishing? Now the friend of this aphorism says, I wouldn't go fishing. If fish could scream, you got me there, absolutely wouldn't go. So the person who would say this, the person who would say, do you agree with this? They're sensitive, however, even there's a little bit of secret malice, if you like. Even then, if we say, I wouldn't go fishing if fish could scream, we're not saying we're sensitive to their pain or sorrow, we're sensitive to the sounds of their pain or sorrow. And of course, lurking in the proposition about our sensitivity to screaming fish is the fantasy logic. Fish can't scream. And we read the aphorism knowing that they can't. Fish can't scream, and if they did, that would be so strange that I would find it really strange even if I wasn't fishing. So one translation of this aphorism might be, any miracle or magic or piece of fantasy is likely to alter our habits if it feels real. Or more satirically, it's only because we rely on the absence of miracles and magic that we can go on behaving as we do. As Bertolt Brecht said at another time, in another place, another aphorism, who wants to prevent the fish in the sea from getting wet? This is Brecht's answer to the idea that we believe that social conditions are natural. Who wants to prevent the fish in the sea from getting wet? I mentioned here, just for comparison, a couple of similar wonderful aphorisms in this if-then mode. Wittgenstein's, if a lion could talk, we could not understand him. Or Kafka, if it had been possible to build the Tower of Babel without climbing it, he would have been allowed. It's the if-then. And in both cases, we don't learn what we think we learn. That is, Wittgenstein doesn't need to say to us, if a lion could talk, we can understand it, for us to understand that we can't understand lions. The question is, what have we understood? And the same is true about the Tower. These are tautological propositions that are necessarily true. So the question is, the interesting point about the aphorism, why is this person saying to me something I know already? And what is it that I don't know that his saying what I do know points me towards? Here's another one from Trevisan. The story has no end except in a new beginning. This also has the balance of the perfect aphorism. It looks like wisdom, but it spirals into doubt, it gets into trouble. It seems to say that the story is endless, but of course it wouldn't need its form to say that. You can say the story is endless. This is okay. What it says is the story has an end, but that end is only a new beginning. Is that an end? Or if you like, it says the story has a beginning, but it's only an end. So the question is, what sort of ending is created by a new beginning, or what sort of new beginning is to be construed as an ending? And at this point, because I'm back to Berta's point about the strange being the same, these two words, end, beginning, they start to lose their old meanings. There is an end, it's also a beginning, there's a beginning, it's also an end. So they don't lose their logical meanings, they lose their stability. They don't lose their meaning, they don't become incoherent, but they cease to be steady and reliable. They become sort of unstable. They're getting more and more comic of these. Every human misfortune stems from not being able to leave the car in the garage. This is a complicated aphorism, I think. The more complicated it seems so simple, but it also, this is where this argument is going. It's not only, I'm suggesting that all aphorisms, in a sense, mock themselves, but some aphorisms mock themselves openly. So this is not only an aphorism, but a parody or a pastiche of an aphorism. It seems to be wise, but only in an extremely boring, I was going to say pedestrian, but I'll leave the joke out of that one. It's a very boring, if it has wisdom, it's a very boring form of wisdom. If no one drove a car, there would be no motor accidents. But it doesn't say that. What it says is that all human misfortune is the result of not taking a car from the garage. All misfortune without exception. Now, because at this point we can start, the novel becomes endless. If people didn't have cars, they wouldn't be able to drive across the city to commit adultery. They wouldn't get into debt and owe the bank so much money. They wouldn't gloat over their terrible machines. They wouldn't envy other people their enjoyment of the Rolls Royce. They wouldn't quarrel over who's going to drive. They wouldn't accuse each other of ineptness. They wouldn't sue each other for large sums of money. They wouldn't make insurance companies rich. And so on. We could think of so much more. We could write a novel even longer than the novel about the hellish marriage. And here's why I think of Tolstoy. All happy families are alike, as Tolstoy says, and as for Trevisan, all car owners are unhappy in their own way. If Tolstoy is not the right person here, we can think of Dostoevsky. This is Trevisan's invitation. At every corner in Curitiba, a Raskolnikov meets you with his hand on the small axe under his jacket. Now, again, this is another, I think, mockery of, this is a very brilliant mockery of the epigram. The banal reading of this proposition, if you were not paying attention, would be something like, there's a lot of crime in Curitiba. You don't need Raskolnikov for this. The thing is there really okay, let's think of the legitimate exaggeration. There is a murderer on every corner in Curitiba. That's still not Raskolnikov. There is a Raskolnikov in every corner in Curitiba. Now the town sounds much more interesting than it was before. It sounds like the headquarters of international psychological, philosophical crime, as if there are no criminals who are not Raskolnikov. Every crime this is the world capital of philosophical crime. This is the moment when I think of Machalios. He's comparing the march on the asylum in the story of the psychologist with the French march on the Bastille, as he says, toute proportion gardée, or allowing for the differences. So here's the true sentence is something, allowing for the differences, there is a Raskolnikov in every corner in Curitiba. Of course, the thing is, the differences are more or less total. You have to, the point about the aphorism here is you have to scrape a little bit, I would imagine, I know nothing about the mentalities of criminals in Curitiba, but my guess is it would be a little hard, it would be harder to find a Raskolnikov than not to find a Raskolnikov in this play, in which case the aphorism is upside down, right? That is, allowing for the differences, there is a Raskolnikov. Allowing for the difference between Curitiba and St. Petersburg and Dostoevsky in the 20th century, there is a Raskolnikov in every corner in Curitiba. And the differences are pretty amazing. Something like that. Okay. Now, with this kind of thinking, where the aphorism mocks the aphorism, this is a form of thinking which is comic, alarmist, extreme, and so on. We see the mockery here, and we realize that our own appetite for wisdom, our own, if you like, ambition to be wise, is also being mocked. did we really think we could get wisdom from a short sentence? Did we think just read a short sentence and become wiser? Do you think, or that's the benign version, did we really think a Radio like Trevisan was going to give us a sentence that we could feel comfortable with and feel more complacent and more happy about what a wise people we are? It's not going to happen. And at this point, I think it's at this point that the distinction between the aphorism and the mini-story begins to collapse. Because in a way, these things already are less like propositions about the world and more like stories about the world. There are other cases where the shift from aphorism to way it still feels a little bit like an aphorism, but you're in the story. Two more examples. To talk with you, my dear, is to argue forever. This is my rough translation of Fala con Rocher, discutir para sempre. But this is just one side of a conversation. That's one person speaking. And the reading, it seems to me, is not about the meaning. Actually, this seems to me, when I read this thing to my wife, she says, just like talking to our son. So, every conversation is an argument, is what she meant. Right? So the question here is not the truth, I think, of the proposition, but the tone in which a person would say it to someone they're calling my dear. And the tone of voice. When would you say it? What occasion would you choose? And what would the force of querida be in such a sentence, right? And does the word for example, is the tone one of reproach? Is this itself part of an argument? Is it a tone of resignation? Is it a tone of a kind of complacency, as if the speaker has understood something the partner's not understood? Is it somehow just weary, just tired? And so, here's another aphorism of the same kind. I've never felt so lonely, my dear, as when I'm in your company. But here, I think, this is a very similar sentence, but here it seems to me the cruelty of the speech, the cruelty of saying this outdoes anything in the sentence itself, either its elegance or its paradox, right? As it's not a particularly interesting thing to say. You can feel lonely in anybody's company. It's not a discovery, it's not an intellectual point, but it is a cruel thing to say. So I wonder then, under what circumstances would a man say this to a woman? What kind of man and when? And then of course I have another thought. Maybe they don't say it. See, maybe they just think it. These are not spoken sentences. These are sentences composed in the head of solitary, timid men who are never going to say them. They just wish they could say them, and they say them all the time, and they win these desolate victories just by pronouncing these phrases to themselves. That's one thought I have. Of course, I may be wrong about this empirically. Perhaps people say these things all the time to each other, but in my sheltered marital life, they seem rather unlikely to say. So it's more likely you would imagine it than say. But either way, we are moving now from a realm. These are conceptual declarations of a certain kind. They're propositional declarations. But we're moving into the world of performance. We're moving into the world of actual drama. They have more sense. They make more sense as drama than they do as logical propositions. We've left, if you like, the realm of wisdom, or false wisdom, for the realm of real drama. But of course, now we ask, have we ever left one realm for another? Trevisan does not distinguish between mini-stories and aphorisms. I'm the one who's distinguishing aphorisms and mini-stories for convenience. He just calls them all mini-stories. All of them are mini-stories. Now, I'm going to close with an idea which takes us back to what Fernando was saying about the early work and the distinction between a short story and between un conto and a mini-story. I think these distinctions are often rather mechanical and we should not be too dogmatic about them, but I think there are interesting formal distinctions to be made. So I'm going to end. I'm aware that one can't end without starting again, but there are. I promise you, there are ways in which one can actually end. That's what I'm going to do. In the work of, one distinction between the short story and the mini story would be this: a short story has. In Trevisan's early short stories, in Chekhov and Joyce and others, it has a shape. The short story has a shape, it has an edge, it has a direction, and in the end it closes. It closes around a figure of some kind. It ends in what it ends in what Trevisan himself calls an epiphany. In the letter you quoted, the word comes from James Joyce, something like an illumination, or it ends in an irony of some kind, but it completes itself. This is generally true, I think, of short stories. They arrive at the point and we say, or we get it. There's something to get. My point about the mini stories, there's nothing to get, or there's too much to get. So, for example, an irony in Trevisan would be in the story I quoted from, The Perfect Crime. The whole story consists essentially of one man haranguing his brother about his lousy marriage. When he's finished with his 4-page harangue, the man goes home to his own lousy marriage. That's why he's so good at telling his brother off, and that's an irony. Or in another wonderful story called 37 Nights of Passion, which are about the 37 nights of impotence of a man in his wedding. He's finally given another week, and he doesn't make it. Even in the other week, he doesn't make it, and that's it. The wedding is over. And he meets the woman on the street, and the last sentence of the story is, Maria, walked over to him and greeted him very naturally, and he couldn't stop trembling. Yeah. Couldn't stop trembling. So the trembling. Now that trembling, this is an epiphany, as distinct from an irony. That trembling is all we will ever know about that man. The story ends. He trembles. That's it. So now, in mini stories, I think these things don't happen. The ironies and epiphanies do surround them. Ironies and epiphanies can be withdrawn from them. But whenever they're formed, mini stories are much more open than that. We are left in a way where they don't close, or they don't invite us to close in the same place they close. They just run along a line and then stop, and then we do something to them. Here are 3 examples from the beginning of 2, 3, 4. The child cries sorry, there's a misquote. Oh yeah, the child cries and the mother turns up the radio very high. Which of the two will get tired first? These are all 3 about the radio. The husband is in pain and the wife turns the radio up to full volume. I want to see who shouts louder. And then the third one, the old woman groans and the old man turns the radio up very high. And he says, presumably, if this is the end, disgraciada, I'm not sure how to translate this, but evento una vez, right? You just spit it out, or burst out, die, and spit your entrails or whatever. Now here, what I mean by there's no invitation to there's no shaping here, and no invitation to closure, and no narrative arc. It's simply an event, right? And they're also a little bit like the Flaubert. They're curiously impersonal. I think someone was saying this earlier. I think Francisco was saying something about the impersonality of these and the ambiguity. It's as if the author has sort of withdrawn from this scene. Berta also talks about this. The author is somehow constant. The first one asks a question, ¿Cuáles dois? The second one expresses curiosity, quiero ver, and the third registers no narrative comment whatsoever. It's just quotation. Right? So what do we do here? Should we concentrate on the radio? That's the thing. It's in all 3 places. Is this like the garage? Is the suggestion that all human misfortune comes from the inability to turn off the radio? But what we do have in each situation, and this I think is where we could begin to pull. I'm not going to do this, but an invitation would be to allow to pull some of this dispersion of materials together again. In each case, there's a radio. It's true. In each case, there is pain. And in each case, there's a single, unfeeling response. Right? The child cries, the husband's in pain, the old woman groans. In each case, the person turns up the radio. And it's true, the old man also says to an event as well. Right? But each case, then, concerns a kind of competition for attention, for space, for human feeling, and each incident offers us a picture of a kind of rivalry. But the interesting about the rivalry is it involves a complete lack of sympathy or care for the noises of pain. And this is partly why this seems to be a very good example of the music of Trevisan. These are the sort of noises in Trevisan that make Trevisan's music. That is the noises of the radio plus everything else we hear that isn't the radio, and everything we hear that isn't in the speech. That's the music. Or vice versa, the music makes the silence. And I'm going to end with one last aphorism which I like very much. I'm sure you do too. What city is this? In the squares, a parade of equestrian statues, and not a rider in sight. Not a rider in sight. Ningún caballero. I mean, I take it also that caballero in Portuguese, as in Spanish, means a gentleman as well as a rider. Right? So you could be translated as not a gentleman inside. No, not in Portuguese. Cavaleiro. Now in Spanish it would be the same. Yeah, so this is a rider. This is the person riding a horse. This is a rider of a horse. Okay. So anyway, the horses are there. The statues of horses are all over the city, and not one of them has a rider. No general anyways on top. Now, here we have absence. We have absence as well as silence. And what it was wonderful about this image, I think, and what I take it to be characteristic in so many ways, is it coolly looks in two quite different directions. One is towards a kind of satire on the city and its habits, and the other is towards a kind of science fiction nightmare. So the more abstract, satirical reading gives us a city without heroes. Plenty of pedestals, plenty of heroic horses, no one on top of them, no generals, no one posturing, gesticulating, representing national heroism and significant events. Now we might think this is a good thing, right? Or a bad thing, depending on your politics. But the fact is they're not there. Whether a good thing or a bad thing, the figures are all absent. And because the moment you think about the actual absence, you return to the literal physical picture of a city full of stone horses with nobody riding them. And see here, it seems to me the plural is important. It's squares, it's statues. It's not just one. It's not just one local square. It's not one square without a statue. It's somehow the whole city. First of all, it's a bit like the Raskolnikov joke, right? The city has got more equestrian statues than probably any city really has. So there's already an exaggeration. And on every one, that excessive number of equestrian statues, the rider is missing. At this point, we have a kind of movie of stone horses invading the city. It's a sort of what I think of as a kind of animal revolution, a revolution of stone animals. So they just finally took it through the crime of silence, that I'm trying to evoke for you briefly and crudely. The crime of silence doesn't always depict crime as its content. But in Trevisan's case, some kind of crime is never very far away. And the imagined or distant or absent crime, it always reminds us of what I'll call the stony lives, of the absences of lives we create for each other to live, and of the hard and stony deaths we allow each other to die. This crime, or these crimes, are louder than any noise we can make with the radio or in any other way, but they are also more musical than any noise we can make. Thank you.
Queria agradecer a conferência maravilhosa, né, do Michael Wood. Acho que várias das questões que apareceram desde ontem, né, enfim, de uma certa maneira, estão sintetizadas aqui, né? A questão da construção do silêncio, a questão da repetição, a questão da imaginação, quer dizer, do tanto, né, que a obra demanda do ponto de vista da imaginação, da construção de romances em torno, né, dessas narrativas mínimas, da questão da ligação dessa obra com as questões locais, com Curitiba, e o quanto ela é legível, né, em outras esferas e com outros pressupostos e com outra história de vida, digamos assim, história de leituras. Eu acho que realmente a gente chegou num ponto alto, digamos, desse colóquio, na medida que as questões estão sintetizadas aqui de uma maneira, e o Michael, uma gentileza, enfim, uma atenção, pontuou as ligações, né, com várias das falas anteriores dos colegas ontem, dos colegas hoje. Enfim, queria agradecer muitíssimo a conferência. E a gente tem um tempo para... A ideia seria que, como a gente fez ontem, os que apresentaram antes viessem para cá para, enfim, fazer uma conversa, né, coletiva e com o público também, que pode se manifestar. O Michael entende muito bem português, ele fala espanhol, e temos a Suzana, que é uma tradutora, que eventualmente, quem estiver mais tímido, quiser fazer a pergunta por meio dela, ela está à disposição também para fazer isso. Então, enfim, queria abrir perguntas, você quer? Então,
Yes.
Mm.
I'm a reader of afternoons in the London book review. Thus, I'm delighted with the opportunity of seeing and can be seen clearly. I enjoyed the talk very much, and I have 3 short questions. First, your university.
Yeah. We should translate it afterwards. The question.
You prefer me to
No, if you speak in English, we'll translate the questions.
yeah.
At the beginning, when you talked about silence being the music, you distinguish between 2 kinds of authors. Those who care very much about the silence around words, and those who do not. But even the author who does not care about the silence can't avoid being read in between the lines.
That's true.
And isn't that what we readers do, to read in between the lines,
Yes.
if you care or don't care about the silence? The second question is about your daughter, who makes wine by mixing blood and water. If he forgot to use vinegar to stop the blood from coagulating, he wouldn't have wine. And if he used the vinegar, this would be undrinkable wine. And the third one is a curiosity. What author, Brazilian or Portuguese, prompted you into learning Portuguese?
Is it okay? Do you understand what you
Eu não consigo saber tudo isso.
Três perguntas.
Eu posso traduzir.
Eu acho que é mais
I
fácil,
was
porque é
just
muito
being
fácil.
Very
asking
polite.
Eu posso fazer para cada
I will repeat the question, then you translate the answer. Okay. Yeah, okay. The answer to the second, the last question is easy. I didn't really learn Portuguese. I know Spanish because my wife has been Mexican. We've been married for 40 years, so one has to defend oneself. so Portuguese, I could sort of defend. I could read it quite well, and I could defend it, but I don't think that much.
Eu consigo ler.
Like most in Portuguese.
My job. That's what I suppose.
That's an easy.
That's too easy. No.
Assim é impossível traduzir. Porque tem que ser pedaços pequenos, a pessoa tem que parar e eu traduzo, porque senão vira uma conversa.
Precisa da tradução ou dá para ir sem a tradução? Dá para ir sem.
É, porque...
Tá, eventualmente então.
Eu tenho que falar no microfone.
Vocês querem que eu vá traduzir direto para vocês?
Não.
Ou só repetir?
Falar no microfone.
A gente tem que ouvir o que ele diz.
Could you use the microphone, please?
So where are we? The one about the doctor, I think that was just I didn't really care. The man was described as like a winemaker. He's not making wine. He's just the reason why he's draining the blood and putting water is because he's going to use the blood for something else.
Not for drinking?
What?
Not for drinking?
No. He takes out blood. He takes out blood and puts in water. He's going to sell the blood to a hospital, or use it for his surgery or whatever. That's Fielding's joke is about the man is in the novel. It's in the Sages, Jules Blesse. The question about reading between the lines is a marvelous question. So I think then I have to refine the idea of the different kinds of authors. There are authors who seek to open the spaces between the lines, and there are authors who seek to close the spaces between the lines. They can't stop us from reading them. But I regard Nabokov, for example, a writer I greatly admire, as a writer who seeks to close the spaces between the lines. That is, he doesn't want us to read, he wants to control the reading, and we are supposed to read what he wants us to read. Whereas I think of other writers as specialists and in opening spaces. Although I should say I can't think of any writer who's as good at it as Trevisan, as sort of totally devoted to opening those spaces. The only figures who would be similar would be people who are specialists in aphorisms, like Pascal or La Rochefoucauld, or figures who actually work in aphorisms. Someone you, rough version.
Nabokov foi autor que o Michael escreveu, sobre o qual ele escreveu, e entende que o Nabokov é justamente aquele tipo de autor que não quer abrir o espaço entre as linhas. Enquanto que há outros tipos de autores que, como é o caso do Dalton, que propositalmente, para multiplicar os sentidos, forçam a abertura nas entrelinhas, né? Nós chamamos as entrelinhas, linhas gordas, eu diria.
Entrelinhas imensas. Agora, o que é peculiar no Dalton, né? Pensando, lá, você falou, Pascal, a gente ficou, quer dizer, você tem sistemas de pensamento, né, muito estruturados por trás. No caso do Dalton, fica muito difícil saber, quer dizer, o que sustenta aquilo. Qual é o sistema que está sustentando aquelas falas, aquelas narrativas. Quer dizer, eu acho que muitas vezes são o que você fala, são os preconceitos, né, coletivos, quer dizer, que são projetados sobre aquele texto. Os comentários do casamento, né, da mulher, quer dizer, ele aciona, de uma certa maneira, uma fala que é uma fala, né, comum, corrente.
Sim,
né?
mas você não acha que há uma relação bem estreita em Dalton Trevisan com um tipo de classe social, com o lugar de onde ele fala, com o grupo, enfim. Não há nenhum personagem dele assim sofisticado, né, da classe alta. Né? É uma coisa, eu acho que ele faz uma referência. Sim.
Acho que Curitiba está
ali
cheio, né?
What makes it resemble, Roberto should speak about this, but what makes it in this sense resemble Machado is the use of cliché. The already corrupt, the bourgeoisie criticizes the bourgeoisie, but it doesn't know it's criticizing the bourgeoisie because it is only repeating its own cliches about something like that. And that seems to Machado is the expert. But this is you don't know the basis of the material or the philosophical basis, but you do know the sort of socio-economic source of the material. But that is sort of parodied, so you could imagine every one of those sentences spoken by a real person, A, by a real person, sincerely, B, by a person making fun of another person in a comic imitation of a person, and C, by a writer imitating the comic who is imitating the person. So there's a circle of depth of texture, I think, in those phrases as well.
I ask in Portuguese, yes?
Yeah, please.
Você assinalou que as histórias podem estar num lugar, e se referir a esse lugar, mas podem também estar num outro lugar, se referir a outro lugar. Mas será que elas podem estar em qualquer outro lugar ou só em alguns lugares?
Não, alguns.
Alguns. Bom, se forem alguns, são alguns que pertencem ao mesmo universo.
O un universo que tenga la misma estructura.
Exacto.
Por accidente. Podría ser un universo distinto, social, histórico, pero tendría ciertos característicos en común, estructurales, esenciales. Estructuras de poder, de economía, pero puede ser muy distinto en su idioma, sus maneras, ¿no?
Mas não pode, por exemplo, passar por uma tribo de índios.
Não.
Então há um universo comum. E aí surge um problema interessante para as questões, digamos, latino-americanas, que é o universo latino-americano é diferente do europeu, mas não inteiramente. E eles são complementares, né? Então, é diferente, mas tem suficientemente em comum para ser compreendido em todas as partes desse universo.
E também mal entendido.
E mal entendido.
Sí.
Então,
Cierto.
aí é uma problemática própria.
Muy interesante, muy interesante. Es como tú dices, Roberto, que las ideas fuera de lugar, aún en su lugar, no están en su lugar.
Mas a maneira de não estar em seu lugar é diferente.
Sí, muy complicado. Es el problemático.
Também europeu pode entender um mundo pós-colonial que nasceu dela. Não é a mesma coisa, digamos,
No.
um universo, não sei, ou de uma tribo, ou de Índia, né, que, é outro tipo de pós-colônia. Nosso pós-colônia é muito, digamos, é muito inspirado, muito estruturado, como se diz, não é?
Sí, es cierto.
E permite entender.
Sí. Pero para entender culturas ajenas tiene que haber algo que podemos entender y identificar.
Sí.
El peligro es pensar que nos entendemos mejor lo que nos entendemos. ¿No? Pero entender un poco es una base de derechos humanos, de pensar en lo humano, hay algo. ¿No?
Pero lo humano es un poco general, es decir, estamos hablando de una estructura social o cultural que en parte fue importada, ¿no?
Sí. Sí.
Então, mas se é um sistema, você pode entender a partir de lugares diferentes do sistema.
Sim, sim.
Né? Sabe, o sistema. Pode haver entendimentos diferentes, dependendo do lugar. Uma tribo indígena, a gente não vai, uma linguagem indígena, não vai entender o Dalton Trevisan, ou talvez até entenda, não sabemos.
Não sabemos.
Mas enfim, tem um repertório. Né?
Para mim, Machado se entende em relação à Europa, e Borges também, totalmente. Totalmente.
Eu achei muito interessante, do ponto de vista formal, você ter adotado o aforismo numa comparação com a minha história. E penso que nessas formas que são mais universais, porque o Dalton não teria falado claramente aforismos, né? Ele teria preferido a minha história.
Minha história, sim.
O aforismo tem um sentido, vamos dizer, ao mesmo tempo que ele abre possibilidades de começar a pensar, como você sublinhou, é como se ele não ocultasse, não tivesse a capacidade de ocultar significados que foram abafados, que estão soterrados.
Sim.
Então, o aforismo do Dalton, dentro de uma sociedade brasileira e até latino-americana, a partir do que você falou, fiquei imaginando que o aforismo no Dalton tem uma carga muito autoritária e uma carga de grande violência. Então, as falas em relação ao rádio são falas para calar o outro, não para fazer uma reflexão, para terminar a reflexão, para que ninguém pense mais, para que você silencie o outro. Então, foi muito interessante, porque você colocou uma questão conceitual que gera um atrito para nós, vamos dizer, que estamos pensando no Dalton, quando eu ontem falei nas conversas telefônicas, alguém fala alguma coisa, o outro não responde, tem as reticências. Nós entendemos que o outro não quer se pronunciar. A fala às vezes é violenta ou é sedutora, e o outro prefere o silêncio. Mas esse silêncio é muito significativo. E essa relação, então, social brasileira é muito reveladora de que o Dalton, ao contrário de outros escritores, onde são muito tagarelas no Brasil, né? Quer dizer, tem uma fala, se fala demais, quer dizer, a redução dele, então, tem um aspecto social. É uma proteção a quem não tem direito à fala, né? Quer dizer, como a menina, eu te fiz mal, ela acena com a cabeça, ela faz gestos, ela imita, é quase um pio, ela não pode ter o canto inteiro, ela está restrita a uma fala reduzida. Não é?
Quer dizer, a fala do poder é reduzida porque ela é lapidar, poderosa, incisiva para silenciar. E quem responde não pode ter uma narrativa. O atrito entre essas duas falas é a minha história.
Não pode ou se recusa, né? Tem as duas possibilidades.
As duas potências.
Quer dizer, o silêncio está cheio de possibilidades quando é usado como discurso.
O silêncio também pode ser muito ativo, né, do ponto de vista.
Mas eu acho que muitas vezes o Dalton tem impotência, é repressão,
Não
censura.
Eu acho que não. Eu acho que o silêncio no Dalton, como ele é nessa altura, também é uma retirada de aspectos da concretude da situação, mas ela é também uma omissão de uma leitura social daquilo. Embora ele revele, ele não faz uma leitura daquilo, assim, clara. Quer dizer, ele não fala, isto aqui é uma perversidade social. Ele simplesmente revela, ele mostra, ele sugere. Ele não fecha essa questão. Ele não fecha essa questão. Ele põe para que nós fechamos enquanto leitores. Como leitores é que a gente completa esse silêncio situacional, cultural, narrativo, né? E aí é o que você fala, quer dizer, esse silêncio constrói a narrativa, como constrói a música, né?
Faz o leitor criando, o leitor acaba criando.
Tem uma pergunta.
Eu acho que o Márcio está se referindo não ao silêncio do narrador, ele está se referindo ao silêncio do personagem.
Claro,
Quer dizer, tem dois tipos de silêncio diferentes aí nesse texto. Isso eu acho.
Então, mas é facilmente preenchível que é o silêncio dessa personagem? Quer dizer, ela está silenciada porque...
Eu penso na comparação muito, por exemplo, com Nelson Rodrigues, onde a fala lapidar é um preconceito. A gente percebe que o Nelson é conservador, porque ele verbaliza muitas vezes o preconceito. A fala dele tem ironia, tem a brincadeira, mas ele reforça a frase feita. O Dalton usa o clichê, como ele estava dizendo ontem, com ironia. Então, às vezes, mesmo quando o personagem fala, ele tem uma sabedoria. Nos últimos textos, eles citam até Código Penal. Fala, o número tal. Ele está dizendo, ele vai ser enquadrado naquilo. Quer dizer, tem uma sabedoria, mas ele está dando um número, cifrado, ele faz a sua defesa, mas ele não desacata a autoridade. Os personagens são rebaixados. Nunca no Dalton tem o enfrentamento. Quer dizer, é sempre o abafamento da briga. Tanto que ninguém sai de casa, até por coisas, pensei inclusive do aforismo aí bonito, num Kafka também, onde Praga, a língua oprime, os espaços são diminutos, as pessoas não podem falar tudo. Então, desse ponto de vista, ele lembra muito também o Kafka. São escritores que não podem verbalizar, não interessa verbalizar, não é ser tagarela, né? O Nelson Rodrigues, ele fala todos os preconceitos, ele tem hipérboles, ele exagera, não é? Vamos dizer, e a gente ri um pouco disso. No caso do Dalton, o nosso riso tem um certo engasgo, tem um certo o trágico no trivial, né?
Você tinha levantado a mão?
Eu vou falar devagar para ver se eu fiquei com uma dúvida importante para o meu trabalho. Eu estudo Alencar e não queria perder a oportunidade de perguntar. Como cultura dependente que somos até hoje, Portugal, Espanha, França, Inglaterra, Estados Unidos, e na problemática do meu autor no século XIX, eu montei aqui uma pergunta que é pensando um pouco no trabalho do professor Roberto sobre a importação do modelo do romance. A questão de importar o entrecho, importar a anedota, importar o modelo, que é um problema que, quer queira, quer não, perpassa a literatura do Brasil, aliás, do Brasil, a identidade brasileira. Enfim. Aí a questão é mais ou menos assim. O senhor acha que vocês todos, que afinal, quando eu dormi mal, ou por marido ou por filho, foi por causa de vocês. Sempre vocês estão nas minhas noites mal dormidas. Então, eu acho que de todo mundo aqui, não assim, ou por amor ou por alegria. Não, geralmente por amor. Mas não é? Quem não for, que levante a mão. Enfim, aí meu coração... Não sei nem se eu consigo fazer a pergunta, mas a questão é assim. Deixa eu ver aqui. Então, senhores todos, senhoras, não acham que o poder da narrativa em primeira pessoa poderia neutralizar esse desvão por criar uma perspectiva da visão desse mundo ficcional? Há um desvão quando você adapta a anedota, há um desvão quando você adapta o trecho, o modelo, etc. Mas a narrativa em primeira pessoa não teria um poder de criar uma perspectiva. Na realidade de Alencar, por exemplo, como a sociedade fluminense era uma imitação da francesa, grosso modo, resumindo assim, pensando dessa forma, o próprio narrador podia ser uma imitação falha de toda essa problemática e nivelar de novo o desvão e proporcionar uma maturidade no texto que, como o texto ainda não foi suficientemente lido na perspectiva do narrador, poderia trazer uma nova possibilidade de leitura para o texto? Eita!
I'm not sure I understood the question properly, but no, perhaps I need a translation of the question.
If you haven't any, I can try to understand. The question specifically is about the narrativa in first person.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the difference between the society,
yeah,
that you import the model or the anecdote or the situation of the characters, you import the model, but when you put the whole narrative in the perspective of the protagonist, first person, is it possible to correct the difference between the societies? You know what I mean? The gap. And then provide the text with more complexity than if you read only the enredo, the plot. Thank you.
My answer would be that you can do anything with any form. Is what I would really say. That is, I think if you had a first-person narrative in the context, say, of a television news network or journalism, then you have a reporter who's claiming to have been there. And the claim is the truth of experience. I was there, I saw this, and I'm telling you. Now, there are many cultural assumptions to be made for that belief to be true. I might just think they're lying to me. In most novels, the first person is a strictly limited subjective point of view and doesn't have that, at least not the novels I think of, it doesn't have any real authority. So one tends to read first persons against what they're saying, rather than with what they're saying. So that you're looking for their weaknesses, and so in a sense, the first person is quite a good example of this reading with silences. But only if that's the way it's written. You could also write a novel, a confessional autobiographical novel where you made the claim of the news reporter. I was there. The reason that you should be interested in this story is because it's true. It's very unsophisticated, but it's a stance you could make. The more likely reading is to read someone like Conrad or Henry James or someone where you think, this person is so confident, or a novel I just read by the English novelist Kazuo Ishiguro, where the narrator is so confident and so sure of himself, he must be wrong. So the third person is actually quite a good instrument for revealing social weaknesses but then you have to do it through the diction of the character, the way they speak, the attitudes they have, and the kind of confidence. So you can get a reverse, but I don't think it levels out social differences. I think you could explore social differences by the things the narrator is unable to say. I think. And I think third-person narrations are more difficult in a way that in modern text, because they do seem to offer the claim that we all agree. There was what Raymond Williams called a shared, knowable community. And we don't know each other. We don't think we know each other. So I was thinking, I was thinking of a phrase I meant to quote and forgot to quote from Werther, where she says, Trevisan seeks to convert what he says not into the presence of the thing said, but not a discourse about the thing said. No, la presencia de la cosa dicha y no un discurso sobre la cosa dicha. And I wanted to add that even the discursos in Trevisan are presences. Even when they seem to be discursos, they're actually acts. Even when they seem to be discursos that might be addressed to by a third person to a large public, they're secretly performances by someone. Does that make sense? But I think it's what you were saying before. These are all really, these are more to do with ways of reading than with ways of writing, I think. That you could take the most austere form of an authoritative form of third-person narrative and doubt it if you wanted to. And it would turn into, like you read Tolstoy or George Eliot, and they keep saying we. Most modern readers say, who are we? Or speak for yourself. So there is a kind of, you can move it around. But I think we learn a lot from Trevisan's skill with this. And I'm impressed, that's what other people have said, I'm impressed by the kind of absence of narrators in these stories. There's often just a fragment of speech, an anonymous someone in a marital relationship, someone saying something, someone in an abusive, you were saying, a difficult abusive relationship, but we get no more. And you were saying, I looked at what you were saying about the pastor who disappeared from the story. We know less and less, right?
Essa ausência de narrador também é uma coisa que está muito na sua poesia, nessa retirada, digamos assim. Uma voz que
Você reconhece algum autor americano que tenha um estilo próximo do Dalton? Algum autor, ou espanhol até, que você acha que se aproxima do Dalton em termos?
The only person I would think of is an American writer nobody reads now, Donald Barthelme, who was a writer of extremely cryptic short stories that left a lot to the...
Donald?
Barthelme.
Que nem escrivão?
Hélio.
Eu quero dizer uma coisa.
Diga.
Então fala.
Eu gostaria de saber do 5 qual a principal imagem que tirariam da obra de Dalton Trevisan.
The first image?
Para o 5 é difícil. A principal imagem acaba sendo o vampiro mesmo, né? Que está na origem do trabalho dele, com o qual ele se identificou. Que é ao mesmo tempo uma figura universal e que ele traz para o local. Quer dizer, essa foi a grande sacada disso. Mas a grande sacada disso foi não ficar apenas no vampiro, foi ter justamente ido além disso e construindo e reconstruindo a própria obra. Mas eu acho que a gente poderia passar para outra pergunta também.
Eu quero só
fazer
um comentário. Não. Borges disse, quem sabe como fala um personagem, conhece o personagem.
Mas quem sabe como fala o personagem é só o autor, né?
Não, ele expõe.
Sim.
Claro, por isso eu acho que no caso de Machado e Roberto fala que ele deu uma virada, digamos, quando passa para a autoexposição em primeira pessoa. Bom, isso acontece também em Borges, por isso que eu estou pensando. Ele sabe como fala e faz falar o personagem. É decisivo, acho, para mostrar. para nosso universo. Porque aí ele registra esse personagem que está com a palavra. Não é que é tudo subjetivo, tudo que você vai interpretar o texto à luz do que acontece. Então, não é só uma voz. Sim.
And it's not modern way of writing, it's a modern way of reading.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Well, I'm saying that there are different ways of writing. There are many different ways of writing. But one of in Spanish, okay, que hay muchas maneras de escribir, ¿no? Y cambian, y tienen su historia y su momento, y pasa su momento. Pero también hay maneras de leer que son muy potentes, que cambian mucho, y a veces los confundimos. A veces pensamos que Roland Barthes, para mí, el teorista, dice que hay textos scriptibles y legibles. Pero la diferencia, aún él no lo reconoce, pero la verdadera diferencia son dos modos de lectura. Podemos leer un texto como un texto scriptible. Podemos leer un texto como un texto legible. Pero es decisión del lector. Ningún escritor... no hay textos scriptibles. Los scriptibles son los textos... Para Barthes mismo, los textos scriptibles son los que no existen todavía. No, pero yo puedo decir que, por ejemplo, Balzac es legible. Como Barthes. Lo leo como lector y me imagino como lector del siglo XIX. Me siento en mi casa, enciendo las luces y paso varias noches leyendo Balzac y creo que entiendo muy bien. Pero lo puedo convertir en un texto descriptible pensando que yo soy Balzac. ¿Por qué escribí eso? ¿Qué son esas tonterías? Y de textos de generaciones, de generalidades sobre la vida. Entonces pongo en duda todo lo que hay en el texto, ¿no? Esa manera de lectura, hay textos que lo evitan, textos no lo evitan, pero hay lectores que lo hacen invitados o no. Entonces, y se puede mover entre esas cosas, ¿no? Entonces, hay en Estados Unidos, en ese momento, la moda no es a la lectura lejana, sino a la lectura de superficie. ¿No? O sea, la moda era una lectura de sospecha. ¿No? La moda entre críticos, así, durante 20 años, 30, fue la moda de sospecha. El escritor dice, tanto, ¿qué quiere decir? De veras, ¿no? ¿Qué hay abajo? Entonces hay la nueva moda, es una moda de decir que el lector del texto dice tal, y quiere decir tal. Y resulta cosas muy curiosas de esas lecturas. Por ejemplo, si te interesa qué pasa con la sexualidad en el siglo XIX, los escritores son más claros si los lees directamente que si los sospechas. ¿No? Las sospechas de esconder las cosas, las verdades sexuales, pero les están diciendo. Pero no puedes escuchar si estás sospechando, porque no les oyes. Entonces, hay maneras de pensar, digo, no hay ninguna manera ideal, hay maneras distintas, pero sí hay modos de lectura que sí importan mucho, que cambian el texto mismo, ¿no?
Roberto, você queria perguntar? Eu queria perguntar para o Chico, a poesia do Chico tem muito a ver com a obra do Dalton, mas é diferente também, né? Como é que você vê isso?
Eu não sei. Eu acho que eu sou um plagiador. Um caso de polícia. Um caso de polícia. Mas, de vez em quando, eu falo, poxa, mas eu tenho que defender também, não é só o Ministério Público, não tem que ter um advogado para entender. Aí eu invento algumas coisas, eu acho, por exemplo, que falta ritmo. O ritmo da poesia é diferente, tudo é ritmo, é a questão do sopro que eu estava falando, mas o sopro não é suficiente. É a questão da música também que você trouxe, né? Que é o tom. Até eu ponho como título da fala, e esqueci de falar, que é o tom de Dalton, né? que é o seguinte, eu acho que é um tom que não me lembra a música, está dentro, eu procurei uma analogia com a música, mas eu fui percebendo que eu estava querendo falar de uma música distinta, que é a música das letras. Das letras como literatura, quer dizer que é uma música muito própria, e dentro dessa música muito própria, a poesia tem uma que aí é uma coisa do outro mundo, para dizer o mínimo, né? Quer dizer, é mais intenso, é mais complexo, é mais uma série de mais. Pode dar esse mais num gigantesco menos, numa frustração pavorosa, porque, em geral, é isso. O poeta, às vezes, sofre mais, talvez, do que o prosador, com esses aspectos de que ele é falho. Ele percebe, você faz um poema, 8 meses depois você vai ler aquele poema, você vê que o poema nasceu, que vem de outras raízes, que está lá no seu onde, uma leitura que você fez lá atrás, e que você simplesmente trouxe ele no ouvido, e ele se produz ali como uma coisa que você, por um momento, achou que era sua, não é, porque veio num assovio, veio numa falsa sonoridade, veio numa coisa... Enfim, há milhões de coisas que cercam o fazer, né? O fazer poético da poesia. Mas, basicamente, é isso. Eu acho que o ritmo... Por isso é que eu não sou fã, sinceramente, dos poemas dele. E muitas coisas na prosa também eu vejo, às vezes, no Dalton, e eu estou falando mal de um escritor que eu adoro, porque eu acho que é um pouco aquela coisa que o Drummond fala, né? Eu não sou poeta o tempo todo, né? E eu às vezes penso que eu fiz uma coisa e não fiz, eu fiz errado, eu fiz uma frustração de fazer um forte, um artista, né? E uma das belezas do artista é exatamente essa, é uma sequência de coisas, é uma vida cheia de atos falsos, que é a própria da vida humana. Você aqui mesmo, nesse ambiente, né, você vê pela cara das pessoas que eu estou falando, mas o que há de desejo de chegar além, as ideias às vezes vêm, às vezes elas falham, né? Enfim, é como o ritmo falha, tem ou não tem. E o Dalton tem isso também, que engrandece isso.
Mas o Dalton, ele nunca chama as mini-histórias de poema, não é?
Não, mas é quando ele faz, exatamente, ele diz, até tem os poemas, ele isola como poemas.
Não, ele nunca, eu acho que nunca ele diz que a mini-história é um poema, ele chama de mini-história.
Mas não há poemas nele, não há...
Há
poemas nele.
Ele faz poemas a Curitiba.
Ele recorta a frase, ele nunca usa o termo poesia. Eu acho que ele não acha que é poesia.
Não, mas os poemas que ele escreve como poema.
Como poemas, né? Como poemas ele apresenta. E esses, eu realmente... A implicância minha, querer defender e dar uma resposta, não, eu tenho meu originalidade de poeta e tal, que eu estou fazendo, né? Ele é que está fazendo coisas que não deve, né? Eu é que estou certo. Mas é mais um furto.
Deixa eu perguntar de outro jeito. Tanto o Dalton como você calam muita coisa. Isso que é calado vai compondo um universo e a força está nesse universo do que foi calado. Os universos que vocês dois calam são iguais?
Não, acho que não. São muito semelhantes porque tem várias coisas. No meu caso, eu acho que tem um dado subjetivo de uma certa interioridade que nele é diferente. A minha, para colocar a coisa em termos assim da nossa província, a minha é mais mineira e a dele é mais curitibana. É uma coisa é melhor ficar calado. Calor mineiro. Mas tem uma coisa esquisita. Belo Horizonte é muito esquisito. Eu acho que o que falta
Tipo, só vou me meter um pouquinho. Mas você não acha que você e Dalton têm assim, uma atenção para a fala comum? Isso eu acho que é um traço muito forte, tanto no Dalton quanto em você.
Eu acho isso aí, não é essa questão do espaço, que alguém comentou, né, hoje, acho que foi exatamente a coisa do... É um espaço cênico, não é a fala. A fala é um teatro. É uma impressionante como você vê na fala. A questão da entonação, que você estava dizendo, né? O querida, o leve tom. Amorzinho. Tem uma crônica do Nelson que é notável. É um namoro, uma namorada, um cara, né, falando ligando uma mocinha para a namorada dele, e só tem uma palavrinha assim, tu, só isso. Um telefonema. Quer dizer, você aí vê, aqui faz parte, dá um choque. Não, um choque é aquela coisa, já começa a crônica assim, tu, uma explosão, é muito engraçado. Então tem esse espaço do drama, né, e da dramatização das coisas, né? Qualquer frase. Outro dia eu estava andando na rua, lá nas vias, Brasília, tem ruas, biliares, inclusive. Mas aí eu ouço assim, uma pessoa passar por mim no celular e dizer assim, eu quero que você entenda. Então é o que está fora, que interessa, não é? É verdade. É o que está fora da escrita. Aí você faz um verso, seria um verso que não quer dizer objetivamente nada, mas na cabeça do leitor, como na sua própria, aquilo vai dizer coisa do arco da velha, que você nem chegou a... Isso vem aprendido com ele.
Poderia dizer que...
Vamos para as últimas duas, e aí a gente tem quase 6. Ana, te levanta a mão.
In the first text that you mentioned, there's a couple that is moving from neighborhood to neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I'd like to comment a little more on that. Like, what does it mean? Is it like their human type, or social type, or psychological type, or is it like a type of relationship or a type of characters that is specific by the author? How would you comment that?
Okay. Bueno, hay muchas maneras de pensarlo, pero dos, por el momento. Uno es que nada más cambiar de casa es el único cambio que hacen. Entonces, todo es una manera de aceptar todo, de pretender cambiar sin cambiar. O sea, uno cambia de casa. Normalmente, en la vida normal es lo contrario. Cambiar de casa es una cosa enorme. No, más que las infidelidades o el matrimonio, cambiar de casa es la cosa más extraña, más dramática de la vida, ¿no? Pero, y lo demás es la vida, ¿no? Pero sí, en este caso es al inverso. Y yo creo que hay una especie de dos bromas, digamos. Uno sobre el realismo y su gusto por los nombres. El realismo y su gusto por los nombres, sobre los nombres, ¿no? Que la idea que si digo el nombre de una parte de la ciudad, he dicho algo. Pues solo he dicho algo, si usted conoce la ciudad ya de antemano, ¿no? Si no, no quiere decir nada. Entonces hay una especie de parodia del realismo de nombres, ¿no? Como si pasa algo cuando citas nombres, o una especie de comedia de la secuencia de nombres, y tal vez, probablemente, una especie de broma sobre la importancia, las razones por qué la gente cambia de casa y por qué hay mercado porque alguém tiene tanto dinero en las casas, ¿no? Porque en este caso ese tipo es un regalo para la gente del real estate, ¿no? Porque cada vez que su mujer comete infidelidad cambia de casa, él mismo es un mercado, él solo.
Eu queria fazer uma observação sobre essa questão da sua poesia. Eu acho que você tem, vamos dizer, num certo sentido, a mesma capacidade assim, de fazer poesia de ouvido, que o Dalton tem uma prosa de ouvido. Mas eu diria que tem algo que às vezes me parece um pouco raso em termos de psicologia, de percepção de um mundo interior, quer dizer, que na sua poesia aparece, e que no Dalton o tipo, a repetição, o clichê, reforça, às vezes a psicologia é rasa, o contexto, o enredo, a intriga é rica, pelo que não é dito, mas parece que falta uma profundidade, às vezes mais uma psicologia, né, vamos dizer, no texto dele, aonde está o autor, muitas vezes a gente não percebe isso. Então, depois eu queria que você comentasse. Eu queria, para o André, queria só falar uma coisa, porque eu acho que tem uma situação do seu texto, que é um texto que trabalha com repetição e com preconceitos, se confunde como o Dalton também sofreu isso, aonde está a voz do autor, né? Você, muitas vezes as pessoas gostam porque acham que você está dizendo algo preconceituoso. E no Dalton, parece que essa hesitação inicial, quando ele surgiu na cena literária, o Carpo, várias outras pessoas falaram mesmo, ele é provinciano mesmo, ele é limitado mesmo, quer dizer, não que ele estivesse armando conscientemente aquele quadro, mas que ele fosse aquele autor. E eu acho que com você, se você puder falar um pouco, isso de alguma forma aparece.
Não, totalmente, assim, no Facebook eu sou cheio de amigos de direita, racistas, machistas. A história do conservadorismo é quase meus personagens. Muita gente lê o livro e acha que eu sou racista. Aí os caras escrevem coisas, aí eu respondo, não, eu também não acho que o PT é tão ruim assim. Aí pronto, aí já os caras me falam, excluem do Facebook, acabou. Isso é direto, eu uso essa linguagem exatamente para... Ela hoje falou ali que tinha raiva de mim por causa das coisas que eu escrevi. Aí hoje ela entendeu que aí, assim, é exatamente isso que eu faço, provocar raiva nas pessoas. Principalmente, assim, levar o racismo ao extremo para as pessoas ficarem com raiva do racismo. Muitas vezes a raiva sobra para mim.
Uma última, então? Não? Você não quer falar? Tinha alguma... Alguém mais que você fez?
Não, desculpe, não, porque eu esqueço rapidamente as coisas. Estou com um certo problema, aquele probleminha que vem com a idade. Que no ano passado recente desaparece e as coisas lá de trás surgem e te dão cada susto, medonho. Eu estou me lembrando de coisas que eu achava que ia acontecer comigo. Eu já tinha esquecido, feito enormes esforços para esquecer, volto. Se você puder.
Não era uma pergunta, era mais um comentário que eu acho que, na verdade, inclusive do ponto de vista das cidades, quando você falou essa questão mineira, eu diria assim, quando a gente até viu que o senhor ocultou muita coisa aí, né? Então, eu diria que, vamos dizer, a sua experiência no Rio de Janeiro, quer dizer, é um mineiro no Rio.
Pois é.
Mas é no Rio, não é em Curitiba. É um mineiro em Brasília, passando pelo Rio, quer dizer, tem uma experiência de viver fora no exílio. Então eu tenho a impressão que para as línguas, inclusive, tem poemas teus que trabalham com outras línguas, quer dizer, há uma multiplicidade de vozes na sua poesia e que você procura exatamente, às vezes, trabalhar com sensações de estranhamentos, de absurdos, de nonsense, e que o Dalton me parece que ele tem um controle que em algum ponto pode limitar um pouco mais, às vezes, o projeto literário dele. Não que não estou criticando, eu acho que tem coisas geniais. Agora, me parece que você tem uma porosidade até democrática, de mobilidade social, de escutar o cara que é do poder, o cara rico, o filho da puta, o cara que é o pobre coitado, o cara que é o garçom. Quer dizer, desse ponto de vista, o teu retrato de um tipo de poesia, vamos dizer, que você monta, você tem essa preocupação de dar um painel de complexidade. Então, quando hoje o Maio falou muito da questão do aforismo, eu achei que esse era um ponto central que permite ao Dalton, agora que ele releu a obra dele, porque eu achei que vai muito no sentido do que eu estava querendo dizer, que o Dalton desvia os atalhos, quando ele corta e vai reler o seu próprio texto, ele liberou para que a gente consiga colocar silêncios e outras falas. Porque antigamente o texto era armado, tinha um enredo, e você chegava a uma conclusão final que era aquela que ele queria. No momento que ele passou a ele mesmo reler os seus textos e cortar, eu acho que a literatura dele ganhou muito de entrar outras vozes, a criança, a mulher separada, o homossexual, coisa que não tinha. Tinha o preconceito contra. Agora não, agora essas pessoas falam no texto dele. Mas no teu parece que sempre foi uma procura. Sempre você quis dar essa voz, não é?
Essa coisa tem a ver com uma coisa. Eu sempre desejei muito isso, tenho devoção pela ficção. E a ficção dentro da poesia não funciona, no meu ver. Ela tem que ser uma ficção vazada, cheia de buracos e não completada. Quer dizer, eu vejo aí uma coisa, você não pode definir muito e você não pode ter um trecho. Quando há trecho nos poemas, eu acho que eles se reduzem muito. A interpretação mesmo dos poemas, como eu vejo frequentemente as pessoas acharem, interpretarem poemas meus, eu tenho uma sensação que não é por aí. Eu não gostaria que fosse interpretado num certo sentido. Tem que haver uma espécie de entrega também do leitor, no sentido de deixar aquelas vozes soltas, não tentar fechar. E isso é uma coisa que eu acho que distingue. É um dos pontos do advogado do Ministério Público está falando, da advocacia pública, no caso. Né? Enfim, eu acho que há uma indefinição que era bom que seja, e pulsões, né? Pulsões que vêm de fora, que vêm dos entes sociais que estão ali, estão produzindo aquilo, mas são pessoas que, no fundo, a linguagem ali é uma imensa, é anônima, é como se não tivesse ninguém, fosse uma voz sem definição, porque não é ficção, não é prosa, não é poesia, é outra esfera.
Mas conta uma história. Eu acho que conta uma história.
Conta, porque claro. Eu estou dentro da história, está todo mundo dentro da história, mas é uma história engolida,
quebrada.
Forte. Eu não gosto da história, está fora, eu sou anti-história. Eu sou um exemplo de epifania, eu sou inefável. É aquele velho ideal dos poetas, né, de antigamente. Quer dizer, enfim, é uma coisa de...
La langue française ne menace personne.
La langue française
Tem um poema, isso, Chico viu num corredor da Unesco. E eu pensei outra coisa, em Princeton, lembra que teve uma briga entre o departamento de francês e o departamento de espanhol? Eu pensei que era, porque os franceses eram reis. Quando nós morávamos lá, a langue francesa. Não precisava de outra, não é? E aí, a espanhola passou. Aí, então, provavelmente eles falaram isso. Mas depois, o Chico, você me confessou que era outra coisa.
É meus trabalhos, o secretário da Unesco me deu que queria reagir contra a ameaça inglesa. Então ele era ele era muito rico, era um homem de um passado meio rigoroso, meio tornou-se milionário, gastava. Parece que ele casou com uma pessoa muitíssima. E aí e ele tinha essa paixão, né, pela langue française, que era a língua dele. E aí ele achou que todas as organizações internacionais estavam sendo corroídas pelo inglês. E aí se ofereceu ao mesmo, foi bater uma porta mais receptiva, né, porque é o mesmo. Aquele nosso escritor, que foi intérprete lá, eu esqueci o nome dele, o grande argentino. Cortado tinha uma frase dele que era "L'Unesco, c'est le fromage da linguagem". Era o auge da delícia. Né? Então, esse cidadão foi e se ofereceu com ele a sua fortuna toda para criar uma organização chamada União Latina, né, para dentro do chapéu do mesmo, né, para defender a língua francesa, a cultura francesa, dizendo que não, que absolutamente, que eles estavam ali simplesmente fazendo um gesto de grandeza e tal, etc. Mas no fundo o que ele queria era isso. E aí conseguiu. Mas entre as várias coisas, não é que ele chegava, mas estão fazendo intriga daí, dizendo que nós estamos querendo interesse próprio e tal, defender a nossa língua, nada disso. O
Bom, acho que estamos podendo encerrar, né? Eu queria agradecer muito então, a presença de vocês todos da plateia, foi maravilhoso. Muito obrigado.